welcome to this brief tutorial on the key aspects of legislation. For Learning Outcome 1, Assessment Criteria 1.2, you will need to summarise the key aspects of legislation, regulations and codes of practice that relate to your own roles and responsibilities. Legislation tends to be an act of Parliament. Regulations tend to be other parts of the legislation that are attached to it, and codes of practice could be either internal or external to your organisation. So for example, for legislation we have the Health and Safety at Work Act, the Equality Act and the Data Protection Act. Some examples of regulations which are all related to health and safety in this instance are cost regulations, manual handling regulations and display screen regulations. Some example of codes of practice could be the requirements of Ofsted, the inspectorate body for schools and colleges, plagiarism, or the appeals and complaints procedure. Now both these can be either internal or external to your organisation. Here's some further examples of some legislational requirements. So as we've already mentioned, we've got the Health and Safety at Work, Equality Act. We've also got things like the Children's Act of 2004, which talked about Every Child Matters. We've got the Important Safeguarding of Vulnerable Groups Act of 2006. We've got the Data Protection Act, Freedom of Information Act, and also the Copyright Designs and Patents Act. Some example of regulations, other than the three we've already mentioned, we've got the Electricity at Work, Provision and Use of Work Equipment, Food Hygiene and Fire Safety. And finally, codes of practice. I say you could have many types of codes of practice within your internal organisation. The awarding organisation that certificates your qualification will also have policies and procedures. For example, the plagiarism policy, the appeals and complaints policy. Ofsted will have their regulations and codes of practice too, and the IFL, the Institute for Learning, also have their professional codes of conduct if you happen to be a member of that establishment. A good way to present this information for your assignment is in a table form, and I've got some examples here. So if we looked at the first one on the left hand side, we've got the Equality Act of 2010. Now a key aspect of that is access for all, fair treatment and no discrimination. Then you can give an example of what you feel your responsibility is to cover that act. So for example, arrange additional support for a disability. Looking at the cost regulations, the key aspect of that is, for example, managing risk of hazardous substances. And how do you do that? Well, you ensure PPE is used. Awarding organisation policies and procedures. Well, adherence to the rules of the certificating body, for example, cities and guilds. And what do you do to show your responsibilities towards that? Well, you'll meet evidence requirements that cities and guilds ask you to. So it's pretty straightforward for this assignment really. It's getting a table to present your information and choose, I don't know, several acts of law, several regulations and some organisational policies and procedures as well. I mean, if you can get 3 of each, that's great, but remember it's totally geared to what you do as in your teaching role. Okay, so if you don't actually touch any of this health and safety stuff, then you might find other regulations and codes of practice that equate more to you. Good luck with this one.